Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. So this week I'm going to be answering a viewer's question. I might try to insert a picture of the question before I actually jump into the video, just so you can read it for yourself. I did block out the person's picture and name just because I haven't received permission to use their image or their name on my page. So I figured I would just block it out, but you know who you are, who asked the question. And yeah, so the question is really about, is there a certain length of time that after which a child has to become legally free for adoption in the foster care system? So the example she gave was that if a child's in foster care for a year or 18 months, do they automatically have to become legally free for adoption so that they don't languish in the system? So I'm going to be diving into that in this video today, and if you're interested in that, then stick around. But first, if you're new here, my name is Anna Leonora, and together with my husband Jason, we are foster parents in real life, and here on my channel, From the Fosters, we do foster parenting life together, and we raise awareness for the foster care system. So if any of that interests you, please consider liking the video, subscribing to my channel down below. You can follow me on TikTok and Instagram at From the Fosters as well. But yeah, that way you can join my growing family here on YouTube and help us raise more awareness for the foster care system. All right, let's get into our video. I'm gonna pause right here and put in a picture, or I'm gonna try to put in a picture of the comment. You guys can pause and read it. That way you can kind of get a full understanding of what the question was. And then I will come back and we will dive into the answers. Okay, so now that you've taken a moment to read the question, like everything else in foster care, the answer to this is it depends. There is no federal law about how long a child in foster care, at what point they would legally become free for adoption. There's no federal law about it. It is different in every state. But I will speak again in generalities and sort of about what it's like in my state, in North Carolina, and hopefully that'll at least give you a little bit of an idea. In North Carolina, at 12 months in care, so 1 year, is when the team is supposed to start looking at permanency options. That does not mean the child becomes legally free for adoption. That just means that if reunification, this is really complicated and hard to talk about. If reunification has really been the only thing on the plan, at a year they can start talking about other things, like adding guardianship as a secondary, or even starting the process of talking about the potential for adoption. However, that does not mean that at 1 year the child becomes legally free for adoption, or that reunification efforts stop just because the child's been in care for a year. That's not what that means. It just means that at 12 months, we need to start looking at what our options are for permanency for the child. If parents are working their plan and making progress, reunification will remain the #1 goal at 12 months. There are parents who need more time than that to get things handled and situated so that their home is appropriate for a child. There are children who are in foster care for 3 and 5 years before becoming either legally free for adoption or being reunified or going to kinship or whatever the situation is. I feel like those cases aren't as common. Like 3 to 5 years is a really long time for a child, especially the young ones. A lot of times with the older kids, I think in North Carolina, it's either age 12 or 14. I can't remember. But either at age 12 or 14, the child actually has to consent to the adoption. So the parents' rights might be terminated, but if the child doesn't want to be adopted, they don't have to be adopted. You know, they'll just continue to be in foster care until they age out. For the younger kids, there's just studies that show that adoption is better than guardianship or whatever else. But of course, the #1 goal is reunification. Reunification is going to be the number one goal unless the parents just really are not working their plan. And at some point, which is determined by the team, they will start looking at stopping reunification efforts. So it just becomes so complicated because every case is different. Every state is different. There is no maximum amount of time. So if a parent is working their plan for 3 years and DSS and the judge don't feel that it is in the child's best interest to stop reunification efforts, then that child's in care for 3 and 5 years before they get to reunify or before something else happens. So there's no max on it, which I think is unfortunate. I think that it is important to allow enough time for parents to try to work their plan and make sure they have enough resources. But if they are not utilizing the resources that are provided to them, and they're not able to get it together in a certain amount of time, I don't know what that time is, but in a certain amount of time, it does make sense to say, okay, we need to stop this now because this is not good for the child's mental health. It's not good for the child to be languishing in the system, not knowing if they're going home, if they're not going home, what's going to happen to them. That's a very challenging thing for a child to go through, especially a young one who doesn't have the prefrontal cortex development and just isn't able to really comprehend what's happening. So by state, they can start the conversations at 12 months about permanency. But more often than not, the idea of what to make the permanency or the idea to stop reunification doesn't happen at 12 months. It's usually closer to 18 months to 2 years, at least from what I've seen in my particular county. In my particular county, at 18 months to 2 years, if the parents haven't worked their plan, they haven't been able to work their plan, that's usually when DSS will start asking the court if they can terminate parents' rights. But again, it's not a set like DSS goes to court and say, I want to stop reunification efforts, and then all of a sudden the child is free for adoption. There is a whole process for terminating parents' rights because once that's done, it's permanent and it cannot be undone. So it's a big deal legally and emotionally to sever that tie. So there has to be a lot of evidence. So they actually will do a court date where people will come in. It's called TPR, or termination of parental rights. People will come in both on DSS's side and on the birth parent's side and present evidence. So the birth parents will present what they've done towards their case plan, where they're at now, and the DSS will do the same, what they have completed on their plan, but what they haven't completed on their plan as well, and the child's needs, and just sort of all of this stuff, and present it to the judge, and the judge will decide, yes, I'm going to terminate these parents' rights, or no, I'm going to give them more time. If they terminate the parents' rights legally in the state of North Carolina, and I imagine every other state has some sort of similar process, legally in the state of North Carolina, the birth parents have 30 days to appeal that termination of parental rights. So if they appeal it, it's still hung up in court. That child's still not free for adoption yet. So then the appeals process, it goes, again, this is for North Carolina. So I imagine other states are similar, but they may not be exactly the same. If the parents appeal within that 30 days, the case then will go to the North Carolina Supreme Court. And they have to see the evidence and hear the case, and they decide whether they're overturning that appeal or they're maintaining that appeal. If they maintain that appeal, it is permanent, it is done. There are no other steps. Those parents' rights are terminated, and now that child is free and clear for adoption. If they overturn the appeal, like if they overturn the TPR in appeals, then the parents have their rights back. That doesn't mean they get their kids back. It just means that they haven't lost their rights and the child's not free for adoption. In my county, they do a very good job at making sure that they have provided every resource they can for the parents, that they have given the parents ample time and opportunity to work their plan and get their kids back. So typically in my county, we don't hear about termination of parental rights right at 12 months. Legally, they could, but they don't in our county typically, unless it was really severe circumstances, in which case it has happened. But yeah, so in our state, they can start the conversations, or they are legally required to start the conversations about permanency at 12 months. Other states, it's 18 months. I've heard 9 months. I've heard 15 months. It depends on the state. But that doesn't mean that once you hit that mark, automatically the child is free for adoption. It also doesn't mean that once you hit that mark, automatically the parents stop losing, or they don't have time to try to get reunification anymore. There are cases where kids are in care for 2, 3, 4, 5 years and end up reunifying. If the parents are working their plan, and if they're doing what they're supposed to, and if everybody on the care team, including the judge, believe that the parents really can do what they need to get the kids back, then they can continue the reunification process if that is what DSS and the judge agree on. But more often than not, once you've hit the 18-month mark, the 2-year mark, that's when DSS starts saying, you know, if the parents haven't been able to work their plan at this point, how are they going to be able to properly care for a child? If you can't get it together in 1.5 years or 2 years for your young child, it will do more damage to the child to make them languish and keep waiting. At some point, we have to say, okay, this isn't going to happen. We need to do permanency for the child. Now, again, with foster care, the first goal is always reunification. Second goal is always placement with kinship, with a close family member or friend that child knows already and can be around people that they're familiar with. Foster care only happens when those things, when a child's safe, when the state believes the child cannot safely stay with their biological parents, and when there's no kinship who step forward or are deemed safe enough to watch the child. They can do, if kinship has the child, sometimes kinship can adopt, sometimes kinship can just take guardianship. There's so many ins and outs, and it's so complicated. And every single case is going to be different. But short answer, no. There is no amount of time that a child's in the system that they automatically become free for adoption. That just doesn't happen. And the parents, actually terminating the parents' rights, is a very complicated and lengthy process in and of itself. And the courts and DSS and everybody on the team want to make sure that that's done right, because if you're severing that tie permanently and you are terminating those parents' rights, it's a big deal, and you want to make sure that that it's been thought through. You've given them time, effort, resources, energy, and they just haven't been able to do it. And there's various reasons that parents may not be able to work their full plan, or may not want to work their full plan. It's so case specific. But yeah, there is no max amount of time. Unfortunately, some children do languish in the system, and the system is very broken. It needs a lot of reform, which is one of the reasons I started this channel, was just to bring awareness. I think it's really sad when you hear about children who were in foster care 10 years, 13 years. They were never able to be adopted. They never had that permanency that they really needed. Or the ones that have moved from home to home to home, and they've lived in so many houses at such a young age. It's a very broken system, and reform needs to happen. But reform needs to happen without taking away from that initial priority of reunification. Parents still need to be given time to get it together and make it work for their kids. But I think that after a certain period of time, again, I don't know what that time is, but after a certain period of time, after years, the children deserve permanency. We have to start thinking about the children in the foster care system, because so much of the foster care system focuses on the parents. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I think it's really important to focus on what the biological parents need, getting them resources, getting them education, helping them out. I really do believe in that a lot. But I also think that the system focusing solely on the bio parents really neglects the needs of the child pretty desperately. So I'm lucky that I live in a county where our social services and our social workers, our judge, really really care very much about the children and what the children need. And while they do, of course, take the parents' rights into consideration, they're really looking at the needs of the child. I know that doesn't happen in every county. I'm very lucky that it happens in my county. But yeah, there is no set amount of time, and it can be very sad and very hard on the children to have to stay in foster care and stay in this cycle for years and years and years with no end in sight. But typically, yeah, that 12 months, that 18 months that you wrote about in your comment, that's usually like a minimum. Like that's when you can start those conversations. But it's definitely, there's no hard and fast, like done, they can't be in for this long or they automatically get adopted. So I hope that answered your question, at least a little bit. Anyway, as always, if you got value from this video, please hit the like button, subscribe down below if you haven't already joined my YouTube family. And otherwise, until next time, friends, stay beautiful and go out and continue to shine your light into the world.